My name is Jason Smith. I'm the director of Northern Manhattan Parks for the New York Restoration Project. I want to share some work that developed out of doing a residency with the Urban Soil Institute at Governor's Island, the art extension. So it's a work in progress, but it's also kind of evolution of work that I've been thinking about for a long time and was inspired by a lot of work of folks affiliated with the Urban Soil Institute and is connected to some ongoing initiatives of the Urban Soil Institute. So I'm really glad to get to share it with you all. New York Restoration Project is a nonprofit that restores and improves green space around New York City. Mission is really to bring some equity to the access and distribution of green space. I also, in addition to working on land management with New York Restoration Project, have a background as an artist and an educator, and am really interested overall in design and urban ecosystem management, as George mentioned.
Jason, I'm sorry, if you press Control F plus F5 or Command F5 if you're using a Mac, it'll enter slideshow.
Excellent. Control
F5.
F5?
Yep, F5.
Sorry, not doing it. If someone else wants to go ahead, if it's not really working well, I can improve my visuals and come back.
Oh, it's not a problem. I thought this might.
But otherwise, I'll keep going. So.
Okay. Yeah, it's great. Go ahead.
While I was working on the on the art extension residency, the project was spurred by Macaulay Cullen, who works with the USI, and she had convened kind of a loose conversation with a few scientists and artists about black carbon in urban soils and how we could make sense of it and explore it, particularly how it reflected an industrial legacy in New York City. And as I was thinking a little bit about black carbon in our soils, I couldn't help but think a little more globally about the carbon cycle and how it's really a historical moment where we're changing our relationship with how we generate black carbon. And really we're at this point where, as Bill McKibben recently said, the era of setting things on fire, coal, gas, oil, and wood to produce power must end. And that will have kind of a very important shift in how black carbon moves from our environment into our soil. And so it's a time where I think that it's a great opportunity for artists and scientists and people working in urban space to kind of re-engage with thinking about the black carbon cycle as a point in history where we're really kind of changing how biomass is being burned and what it means to burn biomass. And this is probably a diagram that most of you are familiar with in one form or another, but it's can I go to view on the menu? I have a feeling this is annoying to look at, so yeah, this is really.
Yeah, no, there was a good suggestion there. I didn't want to interrupt. I'm not familiar with the slides, but yeah. Google Slide pros out there know how to turn it into line show.
I'll just keep going.
Okay.
So there's a lot. I'll step back. This is just a headline from the New York Times this week. And it shows, I think many of us know that we're not on the trajectory we need to be to avoid catastrophic climate change. And that's a little overwhelming. And so it's important, I think, in the work we do to kind of take this seriously and give pause and create space to kind of reckon with the catastrophic moment we're in. And it's very difficult, I think, to do effective work in the face of this. And I think particularly as folks working with soil and vegetation, we're under, I think, increasing pressure as it's clear that we're not moving on the proper trajectory we need to be to avoid catastrophic climate change. We're going to be encountering increasing pressure to figure out ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so that's why I wanted to take a brief look at this representation of the pools and fluxes of the global carbon cycle. You know, we're going to be under increasing pressure to implement various schemes to increase this little this green circle or this black circle, which represent the combined terrestrial carbon pool, much greater than what we have in the atmosphere, but also significantly disturbed by what is coming from the fossil fuel pool. And so how we do this and the extent we do it is, I think, going to be a growing issue for soil scientists. One big idea people talk about is biochar. Lord. And this is a scanning electron microscope image of biochar. And it was, but it's got beautiful structure, and it's used, the sort of rationale behind manufacturing biochar is that it's, you burn biomass of any kind of source without a lot of oxygen in a process called pyrolysis. And that slows down the decomposition of the char and is one way to increase the pedologic pool. Some estimates are that, you know, kind of global projections that if this was done to scale, you could increase, you could add about 1 petagram a year to the soil pool of carbon. And that is really, because the biochar breaks down so slowly, that is just slowing this arrow down from like 60 to 59 and gradually increasing the size of this pool. And that's a huge and really ambitious thing, which I think is probably problematic and not necessarily the right way to think about managing our soils. But it creates a really interesting challenge because biochar works really well or it doesn't work well at all. And all that depends on the feedstock, the local soils, how it's processed, how it's moved around. You can see in these images, this is a tomato plant on the upper left, wood chips, a poplar tree, and miscanthus, which is a grass that's often considered to be used for biomass energy production. But they all create different structures, and biochar preserves that structure. So in addition to retaining carbon in soil for long periods of time, it also adds a great deal of surface area, which when it works well can improve nutrient availability and cation exchange capacity, and a lot of documented improvements in soil microbial life. So it can be really fantastic, really powerful, and sort of seem like a win-win. But it's something that requires local soil knowledge and local systems of production. And so I think it's a fantastic opportunity for community level science, community level action. And there's been some great approaches in New York City to developing kind of local community-based soil monitoring work. And so I think this is a promising way to build on it. And I came to this from my work in land management. We plant a lot of trees and we talk a lot about how the trees are sequestering carbon, but we don't think a lot or talk a lot about what happens when the tree comes down. Generally, they're chipped and trucked around, sometimes used in landscaping, sometimes incinerated, sometimes the whole trees are shipped out of the city and landfilled, producing methane. And so most trees in New York City are pretty short, don't live very long. It's a hard city for a tree to live in. So when we plant urban trees thinking that we're sequestering carbon, it's quite different than how the carbon cycle would normally operate in a non-urban environment. This is an image from Cunningham Park. It's just an average day at a park in Queens where a lot of the municipal wood waste is cycled and redistributed around the city. And it's exacerbated, of course, by a lot of the global shocks and environmental problems we have. This is after New York City experienced Superstorm Sandy in 2012. About 11,000 trees came down in that storm. Most of them were, or I shouldn't say most of them, a large percentage of them were actually incinerated on Floyd Bennett Field. So we don't really have the infrastructure to sustainably deal with these shocks that we know are coming. Currently in New York City, emerald ash borer is killing every species of every elm tree we have. And so this is also a way to try to make something of use out of the kind of loss that we know our urban forests will continue to have to grapple with. And so I think one great resource New York has is the soil bank developed by OER, which hopefully Dan Walsh is on the line and might reference in his talk. But there have been some great trials done by, Pearl Eggendorf and Carbon Sponge Project using clean soils to see how they sequester carbon, combining them with compost. And I think there's a great opportunity for us to create a garden science and art space that combines locally made compost, reused clean sediments. So for those who aren't familiar with the Clean Soil Bank, it's a program in New York City to use deep sediments that are clean. It's like the parent material of our local sandy loam. So it's kind of has all the physical properties of a soil, but it lacks the organic material and the structure. So it's this great resource, but it requires work to turn it into a living soil. And combining it with compost has shown that it works really well as a growth medium for urban agriculture. And I think we could do a lot by incorporating biochar into that mix and seeing how much biochar can we add to our soil, and how much does it take before we start to see some problems that you might get with an excess of char in soil. So really, what's their capacity to sequester soil and how does it improve their performance? And so it all depends on what we want to grow. So I think it'd be great to identify partners. I spoke a bit with folks from Swale, which is an artist collective that's interested in forest gardening. But I'd love to identify partners that would want to collaborate on a space where we sort of move beyond the raised bed trial garden, but start to combine a place that we create that we use to monitor and quantify how biochar is working in our local soils, but also can begin to experiment with making our own biochar on site, and also kind of create a space that's designed to create room to allow space to acknowledge the kind of loss we're experiencing and also allow for the kind of regenerative potential of this moment where we can sort of transform the meaning of burning biomass and what it means to do it collectively. There's some small biochar furnaces that you can actually use to cook on. And so I think there's a lot of potential to create like a social space and an experimental art space that is also a garden that's monitoring and quantifying this work. And really, I'd love to collect data that's rigorous enough that it could help make the case on a municipal level that this could be incorporated in some larger city systems, because we have a lot of the wood chips ready to go. We have the clean soil ready to go. And I think this could be an important component of the system that no one's gone ahead with. And I'm sorry again about my poor presentation skills. It's kind of a new issue for me to not be able to do a PowerPoint properly. I'm on a new computer with a new app, but I just wanted to go ahead and get to the substance because I know we're running a little late. And I really tried to be brief because I thought there was potentially a lot to talk about. There's a lot I need to learn about the best methods for manufacturing biochar. There's a lot of design I'd like to do to figure out how can we improve kind of test beds and design so that it's not like a boring garden space. I'd like to I think this project could be done without a lot of financial resources, but what it does need is a good home for it. It needs a good space where this kind of garden would be appropriate. So I'll stop talking now and hopefully there are some feedback or questions.